Welcome, traveller. Come, take a seat by the fire. Let the gentle warmth chase away the chill of your long journey. Listen to the crackle of the logs, the soft sigh of embers as they whisper ancient secrets. Here, in this quiet circle of light, we leave the weight of the world at the door. If you find comfort in stories like these, consider joining us on more journeys. Your support helps keep the fire burning bright. Now, sit back, let your mind wander, and simply enjoy. Tonight, as the flames dance and cast their tender glow on old stones, we drift to distant ages, where marble temples gleamed under open skies, and prayers for grace rose into the wind. It is there we meet the gods at a fateful feast, and how a single golden apple set all of fate ablaze. By this humble hearth, we explore the legends softly, seeking not the clamour of vengeance, but the timeless truths waiting in its quiet heart.
It began, as many tales of both delight and quiet sorrow do, with a celebration high atop Olympus. The gods prepared a lavish wedding feast in honour of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a radiant sea nymph whose presence seemed to carry the hush of deep waters. Marble halls gleamed beneath garlands of laurel and wildflowers, tables bent beneath bowls of figs, honeycombs glistening with sunlight, and golden goblets brimming with dark wine. Laughter threaded through the air, twining with delicate notes of lyres and soft pipes, each chord a gentle invitation to forget old quarrels, if only for this single evening. Even the winds seemed to pause in respect, holding their breath so the fires in polished braziers might burn steady and bright. Every divine guest came adorned in shimmering robes and jewels that caught the light like captive stars. They exchanged stories and blessings, voices mingling in that rare harmony only found when gods chose to set aside their ancient rivalries. Here, for a brief span, Olympus felt at peace. Yet, among these revelers, there was one conspicuous absence: Eris, goddess of discord. Uninvited, her name carefully omitted from every whispered plan, every delicate scroll that summoned the rest of the pantheon. Perhaps they hoped that by excluding her, they could weave a night untouched by strife. Perhaps they thought discord could be simply overlooked, left beyond torchlight to sulk in silent dark. But discord has always been patient, and never truly absent. Beyond the bright halls, Eris watched from shadowed slopes, her eyes reflecting torchfire like twin embers. In her hand she cradled something small and terrible in its promise: a single apple, wrought of pure gold, smooth as still water, and inscribed with words that would unravel all this careful joy. In that hush before her first step down toward the feast, the future already trembled, not with war drums or clashing bronze, but with the delicate thrill of pride waiting to be wounded, of vanity eager for flattery. It was a quiet beginning, soft as breath, yet destined to echo through every heart that would soon be drawn into its snare. With silent, unhurried steps, Eris made her way down the moonlit slopes of Olympus toward the radiant feast. Her gown of shadow swept lightly over moss and stone, leaving no trace behind. Unlike her kin, she carried no lyre or garland, brought no bright blessings or artful toasts. Her gift was simpler and far more enduring. In her pale hand lay the apple, wrought of perfect gold. Its surface gleamed with a light that seemed almost alive, reflecting torch flames and the dance of silk-clad revelers within the hall below. The words etched upon it, "To the fairest," shone delicately, as if each curve of the letters had been breathed out by vanity itself. Eris did not storm into the wedding like some wrathful tempest. Instead, she slipped through the outer columns unnoticed, her eyes dark with mischief, her lips curved in a secret smile. Music spilled past her in gentle waves, the sigh of strings, the low laughter of gods savouring fine wine. For all their power, none sensed how close discord hovered, drawn not by hatred, but by the small, trembling hopes each heart held of being singled out, of being seen as most lovely
most favoured. Near the heart of the feast, Eris paused beside a long table, laden with honey cakes, an amphorae painted in bright reds and blacks. With an almost tender gesture, she held the apple aloft one last time, watching how it caught every glint of firelight, then let it fall. It rolled across the polished marble, clinking softly against a golden platter, before settling at the feet of Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. A hush moved through the hall, subtle as a breath drawn too sharply. Eyes turned. Conversation faltered. The apple lay there innocent and small, yet the words upon it burned themselves into every watching mind. To the fairest. Hera's regal posture stiffened. Athena's keen gaze narrowed. Aphrodite's lips parted in a smile that was not quite gentle. Around them, the air seemed to tighten, as if the room itself braced for a storm no one yet dared name. Eris stepped back, her task complete. She needed no further cruelty, for she understood better than any how fragile was the fabric of love and pride. Discord did not always roar. More often it crept in quietly, curling through the soft spaces where desires and doubts slept side by side. As she slipped away into shadow, the feast slowly resumed. But laughter now rang a little thinner, and glances lingered a touch too long on that bright, fateful fruit. In the gentle light of countless lanterns, a fracture had formed, fine as a hairline crack in flawless crystal, and though no sword had yet been drawn, the promise of future wounds glistened there as surely as the golden apple itself. No raised voices disturbed the hall, yet a subtle tension rippled out from where the apple lay. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite stood together, each close enough to touch the gleaming fruit, though none yet dared. Their eyes spoke first, bright with certainty, shadowed by pride. Hera's words broke the quiet, smooth and regal. Surely this belongs with the Queen of Olympus. Who else weaves the bonds of marriage, guards every hearth, ensures families flourish in rightful order? Athena tilted her head slightly, her calm gaze sharpening. But beauty is more than adornment. What surpasses the elegance of wisdom, the form shaped by clear thought and steadfast courage? Who uplifts mortals and gods alike, if not she who marries strength to intellect? Then Aphrodite let out a soft laugh, delicate as falling petals, yet edged with a knowing certainty. Ah, sisters, even cleverness and royal rule find their bloom through love. What drives poets to song, what leads kings to raise shining cities, if not the sweet pull of desire? Is not the fairest she who stirs longing wherever her eyes fall? Around them, the hall seemed to hold its breath. Goblets hovered untasted. Minstrels plucked at strings in awkward patterns, feigning casual melodies that faltered under the strain. No harsh dispute had yet begun, but the air tightened with small, unseen fractures, born not of shouted threats, but of gentle words, each cloaked in flawless courtesy, yet sharp enough to draw blood. The apple shone between them, innocent and patient. Its simple inscription, "To the fairest," seemed to glow brighter, feeding quietly on every glance and sigh. In that moment, without any need for spell or curse, the feast's joy dimmed. Somewhere far off, a breeze stirred laurel leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of rain, as though the world itself braced for what these soft, poisonous seeds of rivalry might soon grow to become. Though no outright quarrel shattered the hall, it soon became painfully clear that this delicate rivalry would not vanish on its own. Hera's regal calm now had a brittle edge, Athena's measured composure masked a steely certainty, and Aphrodite's gentle mirth carried a glint that was anything but innocent. Each goddess stood secure in her claim, yet none would yield ground to the others, not even by a breath. At first, the gods tried to smooth over the growing strain. Apollo lifted his lyre, sending bright notes into the lantern-lit air, hoping music might soften hearts already turned inward with private calculation. Dionysus raised his cup high, calling for deeper draughts and louder songs, urging the hall back into laughter.
Yet beneath the shimmer of strings and the swirl of wine, eyes continued to drift toward that small golden fruit, lying now at the very center of the feast, like a quiet dare. Whispers began to curl along the edges of the tables. Who could possibly judge between these goddesses? Who would dare weigh their beauty and speak a final word, knowing the choice might forever bind the fates of kingdoms and lovers alike? At last, amid the soft clink of cups and the nervous glances of lesser immortals, it was proposed. Some say by Zeus, who wished to keep Olympus from fracturing under so petty a storm. Others claim it was Hermes, ever sly, who whispered the idea first. Let the matter be settled by mortal eyes. A man unentangled by divine rivalries would be chosen, one who might judge with simpler sight, though still doomed by the weight of so impossible a task. Relief flickered in many gazes. Better that this dangerous decision slip from immortal hands. Let its tangled consequences wind their way through mortal lives, far below the bright thresholds of Olympus. And so it was agreed. The three goddesses inclined their heads with careful grace, each privately certain that no mere mortal could look upon her and fail to award the prize. In their hearts stirred both quiet triumph and the first faint tremors of something darker, for the seeds of discord, once planted, grow with a mind of their own. Thus, beneath garlands now strangely still, with laughter thinned to uneasy murmurs, the gods set a course that would ripple far beyond these shining halls. A simple mortal shepherd would soon be asked to choose among divine splendors, never knowing how his answer would echo down through years of war and sorrow yet to come. And so it was that the eyes of gods and goddesses, wearied by quiet contention, turned their gaze from Olympus's high gleaming terraces toward the earth below. There, far from marble halls and ambrosia-scented breezes, lay the rolling plains of Troy, bright with sunlight by day and washed in soft silver by moonlight at night. Among its meadows and gentle hills, tended flocks watched over by Paris, a young prince living apart from the marble courts of his father, Priam. Though of royal blood, Paris had been raised quietly among shepherds, a prophecy having warned that he might one day bring ruin upon Troy. Thus he grew in open fields, beneath drifting clouds and sighing olives, his days filled with the music of reed pipes and the patient movements of grazing sheep. It was to Paris that fate now turned. Unaware of divine schemes stirring far above, he walked sun-dappled slopes with an easy grace, his thoughts innocent of the storm soon to find him. The gods, seeking a mortal untouched by Olympus's intricate jealousies, chose him as judge. Who better to decide what beauty truly was than one whose heart still lay close to earth, unburdened by temples and tribute? Hermes, messenger of the gods, was swiftly dispatched. With winged sandals whispering over tall grasses, he descended like a cool breath of wind, bright eyes intent, the golden apple cradled carefully in one hand. Paris looked up from his flocks to find a stranger whose very presence seemed to make the air shimmer. Before the young prince could speak, Hermes offered a calm smile that hinted at both comfort and peril. "Paris of Troy," he said, voice smooth as flowing water. "You have been chosen to judge among three great goddesses. Look well upon them, hear their words, and decide to whom this prize belongs, to the fairest." In that moment, the quiet hills around Paris seemed to lean closer, their hush deepened by more than mere summer stillness. For though the shepherd prince did not yet know it, this simple task would become the hinge upon which countless lives would turn, and upon which Troy's proud towers would one day tremble. Thus, beneath skies wide and heedless of mortal troubles, destiny began its slow, inevitable spiral, all woven from the slender thread of a young man's choice. Paris stood upon a gentle slope, the breeze teasing loose strands of his dark hair, still reeling from Hermes' words when the air itself seemed to shift. A hush fell across the fields.
Even the sheep paused in their slow grazing, heads lifted as if to witness some unseen herald. Then, like sunlight piercing a soft veil of morning mist, they came. First Hera, tall and splendid, her bearing steeped in sovereign calm. A delicate crown wove itself through her dark hair, gleaming with faint starlight that did not belong to any mortal knight. She moved with the certainty of one born to rule, her steps leaving no mark upon the earth, yet seeming to bend the grasses in a subtle bow. Beside her, Athena arrived, clad in armor that shimmered with a light not of this world. Not harsh, but clear and flawless, like water over smooth stone. Her grey eyes missed nothing, reflecting back the hills, the flocks, and Paris himself, weighing all with that serene, unflinching gaze that had guided countless heroes through perils of both blade and heart. Lastly came Aphrodite, her very presence a gentle breath that seemed to coax blossoms from hidden roots. Where she walked, small flowers unfurled as though greeting an old friend. Her smile was soft, almost shy, yet carried a power that made the air grow warm, and the young prince's chest tighten with an ache he did not yet understand. They stood together in a loose circle around Paris, and though none raised her voice above the calm hush of wind, their mere closeness made the simple pasture seem suddenly vast and fragile, like glass beneath a heavy hand. Each goddess carried herself with quiet certainty, as though the prize were already hers by right, needing only Paris's breath to confirm what the universe surely knew. Hermes withdrew a pace or two, his task complete, though his bright eyes still gleamed with curiosity. This was a judgment none could envy, for even among gods it was understood how perilous it could be to choose between the proud. Yet it was also a moment of strange grace, for Paris stood there in his humble shepherd's tunic, unarmed and unguarded, gazing upon immortality made near. Above them, the sky stretched wide and tranquil, as if holding its breath. The golden apple, cradled lightly in Hermes' hand before, now seemed to pulse with an eager light, hungry for the words that would soon decide its journey, and the twisting paths of countless fates yet unborn. Paris felt his heart beat slow and heavy, as though time itself had thickened around him. Before him stood three immortal powers, each more splendid than mortal eyes had any right to behold, and each watching him with a soft intensity that belied how much they cared for his simple choice. It was Hera who stepped forward first. Her eyes shone with the calm of endless rule, the cool assurance of one who governed not only Olympus, but the delicate web of oaths and unions binding families and kingdoms. Her voice was smooth as well-aged wine, each word sinking deep. "Paris," she said gently, "Prince of Troy, judge of this delicate matter. Choose me, and I shall make you lord over vast realms. Your house will rise in power until no rival dares whisper against it. Kings will bend the knee to you. Your rule will span broad rivers and mountains crowned with cities, all secure beneath your unchallenged hand." She paused, her gaze locking with his, and Paris felt in her promise a kind of serene, ordered majesty that was difficult to refuse. The dream of empire bloomed in his mind like a distant vista bathed in gold. But before he could speak, Athena drew closer. Her armor caught stray beams of sunlight, casting faint patterns on the grass like ripples over water. Her smile was thoughtful, almost tender, and her voice carried the hush of midnight libraries and secret councils of war. "Choose me," she murmured, "and I will grant you wisdom beyond any mortal's grasp. Your name will echo through time, not only as a ruler of lands, but as one whose mind shapes destinies, whose counsel builds cities that endure long after stone has crumbled. You will be honored, not merely for power, but for the clarity of thought that can hold an entire world together." Paris felt the lure of it, to be not just a king of fields and walls, but of ideas, the architect of peace and conquest alike, his legacy sung by poets yet unborn. Then Aphrodite stepped close, and the air seemed to warm around them. A faint scent of roses touched Paris's senses, and in her eyes danced a promise that no city, no library could rival. Her voice was soft, almost conspiratorial, brushing against his ear like a secret breath. "Choose me," she whispered, "and I shall give you the love of the most beautiful woman in all the mortal world." a love that will make your heart burn with joys and sorrows so deep they will become your very breath. She will stand by you with eyes only for you, her beauty lighting every dark place your life may wander. In that moment, Paris's thoughts grew hushed, tangled in longings he scarcely knew he carried. The weight of crowns and scrolls seemed pale beside the fierce, sweet ache that bloomed at Aphrodite's promise. Paris stood silent beneath the broad sky, the soft wind tugging at his simple tunic, as if urging him to choose swiftly and be free of this God-wrought tension. Yet how could he? In his chest thrummed not only the uncertain beat of his own heart, but the subtle pull of forces far older than Troy's proud walls or even the hills upon which he tended his flock. Hera's promise of dominion glittered in his thoughts like distant torches seen from high towers. The dream of ruling realms vast and obedient, of hearing other kings speak his name with wary respect, it stirred something deep in him, the ancient hunger for power that lay coiled in every mortal breast. Then his mind turned to Athena's offer. Wisdom beyond mortal ken, a mind sharpened to brilliance that could chart the courses of armies and shape laws that would outlast marble itself. In her gift lived not only conquest but the peace that followed, the delicate weaving of order from chaos that secured the hearts of men far longer than fear ever could. But when his gaze met Aphrodite's, reason and ambition both seemed to soften. Her promise did not unfurl in grand parades or soaring halls. It whispered instead of glances exchanged in candlelit rooms, of hands clasped under moonlight, of a single voice that might call his name and make all other triumphs hollow by comparison. In that vision lived laughter and tears twined together, a beauty so intimate it needed no armies to witness it. Paris drew a slow breath, feeling how each possibility curled through his chest like rivulets of warm water, tugging at unseen roots. The meadow around them held its tranquil hush, birds flitting quietly among the olive branches, as if the world itself paused to honor this fragile moment. Above, Hermes watched with that faint, knowing glint only a messenger of fates could wear. He said nothing. This was a choice that words could not counsel. It belonged to the soft chambers of the heart, where longing, pride, and fear mingled in silence. And so Paris lingered, the golden apple heavy in his hands, his eyes moving from one goddess to the next. Each watched him with calm, expectant grace, certain her gift must surely outweigh the others. Yet even they, in some secret place beyond their proud gazes, might have wondered how slender a thread could bend the shape of years to come. At last, after what felt like an age balanced on the edge of breath, Paris drew in a slow, unsteady sigh. The golden apple rested in his hands like a living ember, warm against his skin, whispering of crowns and triumphs, of counsels and wisdom, and of secret chambers where love's laughter rang brighter than any coronation bell. His eyes lifted first to Hera, whose calm command promised realms that would bow before him. Her gaze was steady, regal, as if already accepting homage. Yet something in that vision rang hollow, a grandeur that felt cold upon his shoulders, heavy without warmth. Then he turned to Athena. Her clear, thoughtful eyes met his without wavering. In them lay the allure of triumph, not just of sword, but of mind. Cities built upon reason, legacies etched deeper than any blood-stained victory. For a heartbeat, Paris longed for that brilliance, to be remembered in hushed tones long after his bones had turned to dust. But when his gaze found Aphrodite, the world seemed to soften. A gentle heat stirred in his chest, blooming outward until it filled him with a yearning too tender for any battlefield or marble forum. Her smile was neither sly nor cruel, but bright with a simple promise, that he would never walk alone, that one heart in all the vast weave of mortal days would beat in time with his own. So it was that Paris stepped forward, lifting the apple in hands that trembled not from fear, but from the terrible, beautiful weight of choosing. He placed it in Aphrodite's waiting grasp, and at once the meadow seemed to sigh around them.
as if even the grass understood how such choices send quiet ripples across years yet unborn. Hera's lips drew tight, her eyes darkening with an insult too deep for swift forgiveness. Athena only inclined her head slightly, though a cold light danced in her grey gaze, thoughts already spinning beyond this gentle slope. Aphrodite, however, smiled in a way that made the sun itself seem to linger, casting its warmth a moment longer upon the simple shepherd who had set the future trembling. And Paris, exhaling slowly, felt his fate seal around him, as soft as a lover's breath, and as inexorable as any doom woven by the gods. When Paris finally placed the golden apple into Aphrodite's waiting hand, the act felt both weightless and impossibly heavy. For a single breath, time itself seemed to still, as if even the sun had paused in its patient descent to watch. The meadow's gentle sounds faded into a hush so complete that Paris wondered if the world itself was holding its breath, straining to witness the moment a mortal heart sealed the course of countless futures. Aphrodite's fingers curled around the apple with exquisite care, almost reverently, though her eyes sparkled with a quiet triumph that needed no words. Her smile was tender, unfurling with a grace that warmed Paris all through his chest. Yet deep within it danced a knowing glimmer, as if she could already see each joy and sorrow this choice would carve across his life. She leaned close enough that he caught the subtle perfume of wild roses, of sunlit gardens hidden from all but those she chose to guide by the hand. In that nearness, Paris felt both cherished and strangely small, caught up in a promise older than any kingdom's walls. Beside her, Hera stood tall and motionless. The delicate lines at the corners of her mouth tightened ever so slightly, though her regal mask did not crack. No scorn passed her lips. Queens did not rail or plead. They carried their injuries like hidden daggers, waiting for the day when time itself would turn the blade. In her dark eyes, Paris glimpsed a glint of something vast and cold, a patience stretched across ages. It slid over his skin like the brush of ice-laced wind, leaving behind a faint shiver that would linger long after she had departed. Athena watched him too, her gaze steady as moonlight on still water. No anger flared there, only a clear, sharp sorrow tinged with the quiet inevitability of storms long foreseen. Perhaps she already traced the winding road from this tranquil slope to foreign shores, where armor would flash and men would shout their war cries into uncaring skies. Her nod was slight, almost respectful, yet carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Paris felt his breath catch, as if he had glimpsed a sorrow so vast it threatened to pull him under. Then Aphrodite, with a final soft look, stepped nearer still. Her hand rose, not to caress his cheek, but to rest lightly over his heart, a fleeting touch that made warmth bloom under his ribs, tender and aching all at once. In that contact was a promise more binding than any oath spoken aloud. What I have pledged will come, swift as the tide, bright and consuming. Love will find you, and through it you will taste joys so sharp they will make the sweetest wine bitter by comparison. And grief too, for no great love blooms without thorns. She drew back, the golden apple cradled against her breast like a fragile jewel, and then with a ripple in the golden air, she vanished. Hera followed, her departure marked by a faint chill that spread through the grass. Athena was the last to go in her leave. Paris lingered in the meadow long after the goddesses had vanished, as though some small, stubborn part of him hoped to catch another glimpse of divine grace among the waving grasses. But the field had returned to its humble life. Insects buzzed lazily in the warm hush, birds darted between slender olive branches, and the gentle bleating of sheep called him softly back to earth. At last he moved, his steps slow and thoughtful, as he gathered his flock and turned them toward the narrow path leading home. Each footfall felt strangely weighty, as if the soil itself remembered where the goddesses had stood and resisted the press of mortal souls. The golden light of late afternoon pooled across the hills, wrapping everything in a tender glow that only deepened the ache in Paris's chest. He tried to focus on small, familiar things. The sound of hooves over stones, the scent of crushed herbs beneath his sandals, the low murmur of distant streams.
Yet none of these humble comforts could quite root him in the same simple peace they once had. His thoughts kept circling back to Aphrodite's warm eyes, to the soft brush of her hand over his heart. Each recollection sent a quiet thrill through him, bright and dangerous, like standing too close to a sudden blaze. He did not see how, far across the seas, whispers were already beginning to stir. In distant halls, threads of rumour and ambition were drawing taut, guided by hands both mortal and unseen. Kings and counsellors would soon hear tales of a beauty unparalleled, of fates coaxed from silence by a single mortal's choice. Ships would be readied, vows exchanged under breath, alliances sealed with wary clasping of hands. All because love, so soft and personal, had laid claim to Paris in this quiet sunlit hour. By the time he reached the first outlying pastures near Troy's walls, evening had drawn its cooler shawl over the land. The city's towers stood outlined against a deepening sky, lanterns winking to life one by one like cautious stars. To Paris they seemed to watch him return with silent, knowing regard. He could not guess how soon these same walls would echo with war cries, how flames would one day lick across their proud battlements. For now, he walked as any young man might after meeting eyes that promised him a love to eclipse all reason. His steps light despite the trembling that stirred at the very edge of his soul. And so began the first quiet passage of consequences, woven with threads so fine they could not yet be seen, but destined to tighten until all of Troy and far beyond its gates would feel their pull. The streets of Troy welcomed Paris home with all their usual gentle noise. Merchants calling out prices in shaded stalls, children darting between pillars in breathless games, the solemn clop of oxen drawing carts, piled high with amphorae of oil and jars of fresh figs. From the high gate where guards nodded politely to him, down through narrower lanes echoing with laughter and soft disputes, his city seemed utterly unchanged. Paris led his flock past small shrines, wreathed in laurel, past doorways where women glanced up from weaving to offer warm, distracted smiles. Here was the world he had always known, its patterns familiar, its scents of sun-warmed stone, olives, and distant sea salt deeply comforting. And yet, beneath the easy cadence of his greeting words and casual nods, something delicate had shifted inside him. Every echoing footstep in those polished corridors seemed to ring slightly differently, as if the very marble under his sandals was aware that he carried more now than a shepherd's crook and light-hearted dreams. A subtle hush wrapped itself around him, not imposed by any watchful gaze, but born from his own quickening thoughts. For no matter how bright the market laughter, or how steadily Troy's proud towers caught the last rays of the sun, Paris felt Aphrodite's promise blooming inside him like a secret flame. That night, he dined in the halls of Priam, his father, surrounded by brothers and kin who knew nothing of the choice he had made under open skies. They talked of border disputes, of trading ships that had failed to return from Crete, of the best horses from distant Phrygia. Paris smiled, answered when spoken to, even laughed with genuine affection at the smaller jokes. Yet a part of him hovered always just beyond the reach of torchlight, dwelling in that sunlit meadow where 3 goddesses had once stood, where destiny itself had leaned close to whisper in his ear. Far across the wine-dark sea, events began to stir with a quiet urgency. A girl's laughter in Sparta rang a touch brighter than before, drawing eyes that would soon look too long, and vows that would prove too frail to bind what hearts might dare. Elsewhere, men sharpened blades for no reason they could name, troubled by dreams of ships, crowding harbours under dusky skies. But in Troy, the lamps burned low, and Paris lay awake in the gentle dark, his thoughts circling back again and again to Aphrodite's promise. A tender excitement coursed through him, so soft it might have been mistaken for mere longing. He did not yet see it for what it was, the first delicate tug of a snare woven by gods, drawing him step by step toward joys and sorrows that would one day echo through the songs of countless generations. Days passed in Troy with a kind of lazy grace, the city basking under mild skies and soft breezes that carried the scent of cedar and ripening figs. Paris moved among its streets and courts with his usual charm, trading light words with merchants, offering quiet counsel to shepherds who brought news of new lambs or stray wolves. To any watching eye, he was simply the same golden prince, as quick to laugh as to dance, loved by many for the ease of his manner and the subtle music in his voice. Yet even in these calm days, small signs gathered around him like drifting petals, almost too gentle to notice. A servant girl, lighting lamps in the outer hall, paused with a faint shiver, as if sensing a change in the very air. Older councillors watching Paris found themselves unsettled by a glint in his eyes they could not quite name. Not pride nor mischief, but some quiet certainty that needed no words. At night, Paris lay awake under fine linen covers, staring at the dark beams overhead while the lamps burned low. Sometimes you thought he could still feel Aphrodite's fingers brushing against his chest, that faint warmth stirring through him like a secret current. He wondered about the woman she had promised, the most beautiful in all the mortal world, and whether her laughter would sound like spring water over stones, or if her eyes would hold mysteries to make every poet's verse seem pale. Elsewhere, unnoticed by Troy's bustling courtyards, ships rocked gently in foreign harbours. Nobles plotted their quiet intrigues, and distant seers woke from uneasy sleep with omens heavy on their tongues. In Sparta, a queen named Helen walked among her gardens with a light step, her hair catching the sun so it seemed spun from dawn itself. Birds settled in her branches and sang with an abandon that made even her handmaids pause and smile, though none could say why her presence seemed that day especially bright. Paris felt none of these distant stirrings directly. He rose each morning with familiar duties, led hunts into the soft hills, oversaw the gentle rituals at small shrines where doves cooed and simple garlands hung. Troy was at peace, proud walls untested by siege, its people content, its priests offering sacrifices that smoked upward in calm, unhurried spirals. Yet in all this stillness lay the faintest sense of waiting. It hovered behind every laughter-filled banquet, slipped between notes of the lyres that played under carved arches. For destiny, once set into motion, rarely rushes. It creeps forward on quiet feet, letting hearts grow tender and hopes swell large, so that when the blow finally falls, it finds a richness of life to shatter. And so, Paris lived these days wrapped in gentle promise, the future creeping steadily closer with a lover's careful tread. Though Troy thrived in its calm splendor, subtle murmurs began to thread their way through crowded markets and shaded courtyards. Traders arriving with bright silks and fragrant oils brought more than goods. They carried tales from Sparta's lavish halls, where banquets stretched long into starlit nights and laughter spilled through marble colonnades. Always, these stories circled back to Helen, a queen whose beauty seemed so luminous that even casual words painted her in colours richer than any merchant's dye. Paris listened at first with idle curiosity, offering the same warm charm he showed any guest. Yet something in these stories found purchase deep within him. Each mention of Helen's smile, each offhand remark about how even seasoned warriors lingered in her presence, wove itself into the fabric of his thoughts. At night, he dreamed, though not always clearly. Sometimes he walked through gardens heavy with unseen blooms, guided by laughter that flitted just ahead of him. Sometimes he caught the glimpse of eyes bright with affection and awoke with his heart racing, hands grasping at empty air. The city of Troy continued its gentle rhythms, priests chanting in cool temple shadows, artisans shaping gold and ivory with patient hands. No one guessed that, within Paris, a subtle current had begun to swirl, pulling him toward a shore,
neither he nor any seer could yet fully name. And so, the whispers grew, soft and scattered, like early leaves turning before autumn's full claim, hinting that change, delicate but unstoppable, was already unfurling its quiet breath across the hills. It was not long before those gentle whispers gathered weight, coiling into clear invitations that drifted across the sea like bright banners. A festival was to be held in Sparta, grander than any in recent memory. Games, feasts, contests of wit and song that would draw princes and emissaries from every neighboring realm. News of it spread swiftly through Troy's palace halls, stirring curiosity and courtly ambition alike. Paris found the thought lingering in his mind at odd moments. While overseeing the fitting of new horseshoes in the royal stables, or pausing beneath quiet arches to watch children playing with painted hoops. Each image of Sparta seemed tinged with a faint glow, as though Aphrodite herself gently illuminated this path, urging him onward with an almost playful certainty. When he at last spoke of travelling there, to bring gifts, to honour alliances, to enjoy the hospitality of distant friends, none questioned him. Why would they? A young prince seeking sport and festivity was no cause for alarm. Priam gave his blessing, Hecuba kissed his brow with a fond smile, and brothers clapped his shoulders, jesting about how many laurels he might return with. Paris's ship slipped from Troy's harbour under a mild dawn sky, gulls wheeling overhead, its bright sails billowing with promise. The sea stretched out calm and endless before him, each gentle crest of water catching the early sun like molten gold. As Troy's towers receded into the blue haze, Paris stood at the prow, feeling his heart dance with a strange, eager ache. He did not yet know that each quiet surge beneath the keel was carrying him closer, not only to Helen, but to a chain of sorrows and triumphs that would one day echo through every ruin where men gathered to tell of wars and the fragile loves that had lit their beginnings. For now, he only felt the thrill of adventure and the soft, almost tender pull of destiny waiting on the far side of the sea. The voyage proved gentle, as if even the sea conspired to smooth Paris's passage toward what waited beyond the horizon. Dolphins danced alongside the ship's hull, their sleek bodies cutting the water with effortless grace, and the sailors laughed to see such lively omens. At night, Paris lay on deck beneath a vault of bright stars, feeling strangely certain they watched him with knowing, twinkling eyes. When at last they sighted Sparta, its white walls gleamed under the clear daylight, rising from green slopes like a vision conjured by the gods themselves. Banners fluttered from high towers, bright with symbols of olive and stag, while music drifted down from terraces crowded with nobles, in silks dyed every shade of spring. Paris and his small retinue were welcomed with warm ceremony. Courtiers led them through arching gates into courtyards where fountains played and garlands spilled their perfume into the sunlit air. Dancers wove between marble columns, trailing ribbons that brushed Paris's hands as he passed, and musicians let notes drift lazily through the blue afternoon. It was all so vivid, so effortlessly intoxicating, that for a time Paris almost forgot the quiet ache blooming in his chest. But it returned when he first glimpsed Helen. She stood amid the gathered throng, laughing softly at some whispered jest. Her hair caught the light in rippling gold. Her eyes shone with the calm mirth of one beloved by all who came near. When her gaze at last met Paris's, it was as though every bright chord of music faltered, then returned sweeter than before. A faint smile curved her lips, gentle yet edged with something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, of an invisible thread now drawing taut between them. Paris felt the air grow close, his heart beating not with the shy thrum of new attraction, but with a deep certainty, as if he were not meeting Helen for the first time, but remembering her from some dream older than his own breath. Around them, Sparta's festival spilled on, bright and heedless. Goblets clinked, dancers laughed, the scent of roasted meats mingled with crushed petals underfoot. No one yet guessed how this tender meeting would ripple outward, how it would wind through countless hearts, both royal and humble,
until it braided itself into a storm that even the gods would one day watch in uneasy silence. Days in Sparta slipped by in golden haze. Feasts followed games, songs curled through pillared halls, and laughter carried on breezes scented with thyme and warm stone. Paris moved among these pleasures with a princely grace, accepting honours and friendly boasts from Spartan nobles, his words light and charming. Yet beneath each courteous exchange lay a restless current, pulling always in one quiet direction. For wherever he went, Helen seemed never far. Sometimes he found her strolling alone among flowering hedges, her fingers trailing absently across clusters of white blossoms. Sometimes she stood at the edge of crowded gatherings, her smile gracious yet distant, until their eyes met, and then the distance vanished, as though the crowded court faded, leaving only the two of them in a hush no song could quite reach. They spoke at first in gentle, careful phrases, each word balanced on delicate courtesies. Helen would ask of Troy's hills, of the bright plains where horses ran with manes like river foam. Paris in turn asked of her gardens, of the small joys she tended with her own hands, a pomegranate tree heavy with fruit, a tame doe that came to her whistle. But under their voices moved something older, deeper. It lived in small pauses where neither found the need to speak, in the faint tremor of Helen's breath when Paris stood too close. Sometimes their hands brushed lightly, as if by chance, and the warmth that sparked there seemed far too great for such a fleeting contact. At night, Paris lay awake in Sparta's fine guest chambers, staring into the dark. He felt Aphrodite's promise coil through him like a sweet, persistent ache. Yet it no longer belonged to the goddess alone. It had become a living thread spun between his heart and Helen's. Fragile still, but tightening, drawing them closer with every glance, every breath shared across sunlit courts and quiet moonlit walks. And so the first tender strands of a bond were woven, soft as whispered secrets, delicate as dew upon olive leaves. None saw yet how strong such threads could become, nor how swiftly they might twist into cords that would pull not only two souls, but entire kingdoms, toward joys and griefs no feast could soothe. It was perhaps inevitable. What began as delicate glances and measured courtesies soon deepened into something neither Paris nor Helen could deny. Each day in Sparta seemed painted in warmer colours. Each hour stretched long by the weight of silent longing. They found more reasons to walk together in secluded gardens, beneath trellises heavy with fragrant blooms where the world shrank to a tender hush. Helen laughed easily with him at first, her voice bright and soft as petals stirred by wind. But soon her laughter caught on small catches of breath, her eyes turning luminous in moments of quiet. Paris spoke of Troy, of sun-washed hills, of the festivals held in cool courtyards, of songs that filled its temples at dawn. He painted each word in gentle shades, as though inviting her there already, crafting a future they had not yet dared to name aloud. One evening, as the sun slipped low and dyed the colonnades in molten gold, their hands met and did not part. The touch was simple, the silence between them vast, filled with all the admissions neither could frame in speech. Helen's fingers trembled in his, and Paris felt his own breath shudder, as though the earth itself had shifted beneath them. Aphrodite's promise thrummed through that moment, alive and intoxicating. Yet it was no longer just the goddess's will at play. It was Helen's own soft sigh, Paris's own racing heart. When at last their lips met, it was with a sweetness that seemed to break something open in them both, a surrender to a bond that had waited beyond time's reach for its hour to come. But joy seldom comes without its dark twin. Even as they drew together in secret gardens, shadows stirred along Sparta's high walls. Handmaids glanced away too quickly, courtiers' voices grew edged with subtle wariness, and rumours began to slip from quiet alcoves into bustling courtyards. Some whispered of how Paris lingered too long in Helen's gaze, how the queen's smile turned softer when the Trojan prince stood near. None dared yet give those murmurs the full shape of scandal, but the first small fissures had formed. They spread slowly, like cracks in a fine vase, fragile but foretelling ruin. Paris and Helen, lost in each other's nearness, scarcely noticed how the bright world around them had begun to watch with cautious, calculating eyes.
It
It did not take long for whispers to become certainty. The gentle murmur of suspicion hardened into knowing glances, hushed conversations that fell abruptly silent when Paris or Helen entered a room. In the bright courts of Sparta, festivity dimmed by degrees, the music sounded a touch more strained, and servants moved with careful, wary steps. Yet within this growing tension, Paris and Helen found a fierce, almost desperate joy. Their moments together burned brighter for being stolen, made sharper by the knowledge that every tender word, every shared breath might be overheard, might carry consequences that none could yet measure. At last it became clear that there was no safe path forward within Sparta's high walls. Paris spoke of Troy, of the ships waiting like quiet hounds by the shore, sails furled, ready for command. Helen listened, her hand resting lightly in his, her eyes wide not with fear, but with a kind of luminous resolve. In that long hush, filled only by the soft rustling of garden leaves, a choice was made, or perhaps simply revealed, for it seemed to both that destiny had led them gently, inevitably here. Under the cover of night they fled. The sea lay dark and vast ahead, scattered with trembling stars that mirrored their own uncertain hearts. Paris felt Helen's fingers tighten around his as they stepped aboard the waiting ship. No triumph rang out, no jubilant shout accompanied their departure, only the low sigh of water against the hull and the creak of ropes pulling taut. Behind them, Sparta slept, unaware that its queen had slipped away into the night. Ahead lay Troy, gleaming in Paris's hopeful dreams. A city of sunlit plazas and fragrant gardens, where he imagined Helen walking by his side without fear, without secrecy. But far beyond these tender hopes, other forces already stirred. Gods watched with quiet, unreadable eyes. Kings woke from uneasy sleep to omens they could not yet name, and across distant seas, the first faint breath of war began to gather, drawn inexorably toward this fragile, radiant love that had dared to set the world trembling. Thus did Paris and Helen sail into the waiting dark, hearts full of tender certainty, never guessing how deeply the tides they had loosed would carve their names into the sorrow and splendor of all the ages to come. So our quiet journey draws to its close. Here, by the gentle glow of our humble fire, we've traced how a single tender choice, born of longing and bright promise, unfurled into tides that would one day shake empires and echo through countless tales. In Paris and Helen's story, we see both the fragile beauty of love and the deep shadows it can cast when set against pride and fate. If you found comfort in this calm telling, consider joining us again by subscribing. Your support keeps this small hearth burning bright, ready to share more ancient stories beneath the soft hush of night. Thanks for listening, and we'll meet again in the next myth.